Welcome everybody to Artist Alchemy. I'm John Cruz. I am a portrait photographer based in Philadelphia in the United States.
I'm Steph. I'm a fantasy photographer based in Lincoln in the UK.
And today we have our guest is interior designer Jasmine Kurtyka. Jasmine, I'd love to hear more about your creative process. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
And did I mess up that name? I think I got it. I think I got the
Oh, that was
pronunciation
perfect.
right.
That was great. That was exactly the way.
Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in if that's okay.
Of course, yes.
So I've always wondered this, right? Because everyone has their own unique style, right? So if you have a client come to you and say, "Oh, I don't know, my living room." I don't know if you guys call it the same thing. Your living room, like where you sofa and your TV. Yeah, yeah. Okay. I want my living room redecorated. Are you always tempted to do it in your own style? Like, because what if they come with things that are like, oh, I want it to be bright pink or something like that, which isn't really you? Like, how do you navigate that?
So there's two things that I do. One is I always try to accommodate the other person's style. And I do that through having them provide inspiration images of what they think they look like. And I say think because a lot of times when people say they like one thing, they get ready to have it in their home or they see it in their home and they're like, no, I don't like this anymore.
Oh,
For
interesting.
instance, in Philadelphia, it's pretty common for people to like traditional things, but then they live in a row home in Center City or, you know, still Philadelphia, Center City. And then you see like the character of the home and the furniture they like, and it doesn't necessarily always mesh. So
Okay.
my job is to help them figure out what their style is because they're like, oh, I want the pink living room. And then sometimes when they see it, they're like, oh, maybe I don't want the pink living room. You know?
Yeah.
In terms of putting my style on somebody else's, I try not to do that. It probably happens subconsciously, where I'm suggesting pieces or being like, I think this is how this should be laid out or things like that. I really try not to, but I also think as my business grows, I'm starting to understand what my client is. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't mesh, and that's okay. And there's somebody else for that specific person.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that's like, and that's something that Steph and I have talked about because our
So
photography
fair.
styles are totally different. So my type of client is not going to go to Steph because,
Yeah.
well, one, she's in the UK, but two, but like she does like highly stylized surreal photography. That's not the type of client that I'm drawing. So like we're drawing from two different pools because the styles are fundamentally different. So I'm sure the more you, it's like any marketing, anything, more you put your voice out into the world, then the people who want to hear you will hear you. And it's like,
100%. I'm starting to see too my own style evolve, right? Like as I'm working with people, I'm starting to be like, oh, I didn't realize I was as traditional as I was. Sometimes I feel that way. Other times I'm like, wow, I really like that modern piece. So like there's times in which I also surprise myself and I continue to expand my style and change, which I think is fun.
I want to take a couple steps back because like some of our listeners may, and I know that there's some there's some confusion around the definitions of things. So like I went to architecture school, so I went to school with people who were studying interior design. So I have a little bit of knowledge of it, but can you explain what interior design is and a little bit about that? Like a little bit of, because I'm gonna be honest with you, like most interior designers I know, it's like there's a big difference between an interior designer and an interior decorator. And I think that the general public often confuses that.
I went to school for interior design. I have a master's degree in interior architecture from Drexel University here in Philadelphia. Um, Explaining what interior design is. So I view it, I'm going to give you my personal definition.
Yeah.
I think interior design is the way the home is created reflects the occupants. And when I say that, I think that's encompassing the entire house. I think that's the kitchen, the living room, bedrooms, bathrooms, all of it. Um, and then underneath that umbrella, I think there's smaller other components. You know, you can get into textiles, you can get into materials with like tile and brick and paint. Then you get into furniture, you know, like there's different silos, if you will, underneath the term interior design. Without being controversial, interior designers are typically
sorry, go on.
designers are typically educated and certified. Interior decorators are people who learn online and learn from others. And I don't necessarily think there's a right or a wrong. I think there is enough sand in the sandbox for everybody, but I do think that there is specific clientele for each.
Yeah, I'd agree. And sorry, go on.
No, continue.
Just going back to you said you've started to develop a kind of style of your own. Have you got like a signature thing that you're like, oh, that's the thing I do? Like, I don't know, I tend to you talked about tradition. So was it like a color scheme or like a pattern that's like a signature style of yours?
I wouldn't say it's a signature like color or pattern. I will say that I have a tendency to not be afraid of color or pattern.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean necessarily that my home is full of oranges and pinks and yellows. That just means that I think every once in a while you can use color in the right way, in which it doesn't become overwhelming to the person observing or living in the space. I think that's probably what people would say. I'm not a huge fan of, right now in the US, it's very trendy to have just kind of like everything kind of be this like neutral, you don't want to have a glass of red wine around it color palette.
Millennial beige.
Millennial beige, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're kind of fading away from the gray and going back into tan. But I think even add some blue, add some green. Like we don't need everything to be the same. And I think when people have everything be the same, it doesn't reflect who they are, because we are so complex as humans, right? Like our space should also reflect who we are. And our spaces are complex typically.
Why do you think, like, when you look at like interior design over like generations, that this is, for lack of a better term, this era is the least like bold. It's I look back at like you look at like Victorian and Georgian architecture, and like back then it was like, if you look at like old buildings like during the Revolution, at least here, you had like full blue walls and like a lot of prints and patterns and color and this, and then when you get into like the 70s, it was like the avocado and the oranges, and I mean it kind of feels gauche now, but like that was the trend where you had these just bold big, and in the 80s it got a little bit more steel and modern and or neon, and then beyond, and it feels like we're in this like neutral phase. Have we gone through neutral phases before, or what do you think's dictating it now?
So I think, and I've thought a lot about this and like talked to my friends about it too, who are millennials and love the millennial beige, that we are so surrounded by social media and marketing, and there's just a lot of other stimuli out there, that when we come home, I feel like people really want to be able to turn off.
Yeah.
And turn off to them means muted. I think for some people it means bringing nature inside their home with like greenery and plants and like serene elements. But I think that there's just so much out there. And I also think that the pace that we live with life, we're busy, especially post COVID in the pandemic, like life opening back up. I think a lot of people are starting to understand that the pace they live pre-COVID and the way they should live life now are two separate things. And they want their home to reflect what they learned and gained and grew from during COVID.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And by the way, just so if anyone's listening, when I said about the millennial, I am a millennial, so I'm I'm not like digging on the millennials. I am one of them.
No, 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 I did totally. Yeah, same.
Um, one thing that I thought was interesting, what you just said, that obviously people are making their environment like muted because they live such fast-paced lives. So in the UK, I don't know if it's still the kind of thing now. I think it probably is. We're told when we sell our house that we should try and make it as neutral as possible so that people aren't put off by our own styles, like they can picture things, because people aren't very good at picturing. Like if someone had a bright blue wall or like lots of colour, they'd be like, oh, I can't picture what I want it to be like. Which I
Yeah.
don't know whether it's completely absurd or whether that's good or not. But what is that a kind of similar narrative
Yeah.
to America?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I kind
apartments.
of want to have everything be a blank canvas. Sorry,
Yep.
John.
No, I was gonna say like if you live in an apartment, you're not allowed to paint anything like they want it as like blank as possible because they want it as blank canvas. Like they just so that you can deal with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Plus, too, like when people come in, they want to be able to turn it over quickly. And if you have all the walls painted, they're going to have to paint the walls, or you're going to have them painted before you move out. Like it's a whole thing. So making sure that it's blank palette, people can envision themselves living in that future space. I mean, it makes sense as uncomfortable it is as it is. I'm in an apartment now, and this is like peel and stick wallpaper that I'm going to have to take down, but it's removable. So I'm just going to like do one of these numbers.
Yeah.
But it's white, so I hope I'm okay.
So talk to us about, so say a client comes to you and was like, oh, I want my, I don't know, my dining room, my kitchen, my living room, whatever it might be, my bedroom redecorated, and I want it in this style, or I don't know what I want. And you say, okay, send us these inspiration photos that you like so I can get an idea. What happens from there? How do you get from I've got these inspiration photos to the finished products and where they're going to go from there? Like talk us through that.
Definitely. So with the inspiration photos, I'll take even one step back before that. I like to have a phone call with them. And if I can't have a phone call with them via video, so over Zoom or FaceTime, ideally that initial meeting is in person, because you can really feel somebody's energy and how complex they are in terms of their design or how much help they're going to need. If they're a decision maker or you can make the decisions, like there's a lot of decisions that need to be made when you're figuring out your style. And like, it's kind of a soul search reflection moment when you're buying a sofa or a rug or something like that, because people have to ask themselves, do I want it? Do I want to spend X amount of money on this product that is supposed to reflect me in my home? And I always try to remove myself from that because that's their journey to take. I'm just here to help people walk that path. But yeah, so I have the initial phone call. We do the inspiration images. I might send them some, they might send me some, and we kind of feel it out, you know, really fine tune what their style is. From there, what I do is once I have the dimensions of the space and figure out their needs, we'll start sourcing furniture. I'm going to take an example. I have a client, they recently bought a home. They have a space in which they are going to keep their existing dining table, but they needed new chairs. They wanted a new chandelier. They wanted updated wall paint. And we kind of went through the list of the things they wanted, and then I fulfilled them. What I do is I give options. I like to work in a good, better, best situation. Mm-hmm. And for me, that doesn't always reflect price point or quality. It's more just what I think is the ultimate fit for the space. So sometimes the best might be the middle priced or the lowest priced, but it's the best because best fit what I think. And I, put all this into a PDF. I put live links in there, and then I send it off to them. And typically we speak over the phone and kind of digest the information. Me giving them the links to purchase everything allows my clients to sit on it for however long they want and purchase it on their time.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think interior designers say, here's your options, and you're kind of presented with this board, and there's a lot of pressure to do everything at once. And I think when people especially are moving into their space, there's a lot of finances that are moving and flowing, and there's emotion behind all that. And I want to make sure that they're comfortable, right? I want you to be in the best level-headed state you can be when you're purchasing your rug or your dining chairs or your chandelier, because it's going to hopefully be in your home for 5+ years. Like, this isn't, you don't make those decisions on a whim, especially when you're dealing with hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. So that's kind of the process. And then if they say, hey, we don't like this, then we kind of resource things and go back. And I design in a very collaborative way. I like to work with people and talk things through. Oh, you don't like the black? How do you feel about the gray? Oh, you like the gray? Let's find a new gray set. You know, like, it's very collaborative. I'm open to feedback. I'm helping you walk your path and find what's best for your home. So that's kind of how I operate.
I guess, yeah, I guess you also have to take into account, as well as like their personal style and like whatever vision they might have, you have to take into account how do they use that space. Because if it's something that's like a lot of traffic every day, but then they want another space which is hardly used, and then maybe just go there to read a book, you're going to approach it from a different kind of angle, right?
Yeah, no. I consider residential design to be quite intimate. And I think a lot of times people think that word is not the right use or the adjective for that sentence, but there's no closer relationship to a person understanding how they operate in their home, right? So when I'm helping somebody pick out their bedroom furniture, let's talk nightstands. What's on your nightstand? Do you have a lamp? Do you keep books? Do you have a water next to your bed? Do you keep your electronics? Are you a type that you like everything to be in a drawer? Do you like it exposed? Understanding how somebody operates within their home, there's a large psychological portion to that, and like breaking it all down, right? So I really think that it's so close. And I mean, John's heard this one 10 times over, but form follows function. I sometimes like to invert that, and that function needs to follow form, because you don't want to be choosing an item that doesn't serve your needs in your home.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Even though it's pretty, like, it might not be useful, and then what?
Yeah. And what do you do if, and I suppose again this is kind of encroaching on your own kind of thoughts around it, but if someone came to you and was like, I want this and then I want this, and it's completely a bit chaotic and like doesn't really, it's kind of mix and match, do you go okay and try and roll with it, or do you go can we advise them this way? Because obviously not everyone's like has a kind of designery or artistic eye to know what will go. So how do you approach that when you have a client who's like, oh, I want this?
I was going to say, plus the average person has absolutely no concept of space and how big a thing is going to be. Like,
and I'm going to add one to that, and cost.
Yeah.
Because
I want these two things, and you're going to be able to walk. You're going to be able to walk down an aisle like this. So,
so I would say and this probably isn't a great answer, but it's a combination of the two things you said, right? Like, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? At the beginning of the year, I was working with a client, and he had these existing 2 yellow chairs. And when I say yellow, I am talking
like Big Bird yellow,
Post-it yellow. Okay. And he wanted the color scheme to be yellow and turquoise. And I was kind of taken back because that's loud. I said I liked color, but that's a lot. So my job was to figure out how to bring in muted elements that worked with what he wanted. And I voiced my opinion in a very respectful kind of way. But I'm also being hired to make what he has work. And a lot of times my clients will have existing pieces that they want the design scheme to be centered around or incorporated into. And it's one of those things where it no longer becomes my designs. I'm working with them, and probably they have to give more than I'm giving. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
In the sense where anything that I propose, they're probably not going to like because I'm not understanding what they want. And it also goes back to this person is not my ideal client. A lot of times though, like with this person I'm thinking of, we did a prior project together. So there was an existing relationship, and that's why this project came into my hands.
Okay. It does make sense. Like I always say, well, I've said it to John, I've said it to past guests, that like with my style of photography, I am not someone you would hire for a newborn or for a wedding. Well, I've had a few ask for a wedding, but like I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and I'm fine with that. And there is someone who will be amazing match for you. But yeah, I completely get the whole I'm probably not the right match for you at this point. So
And
yeah,
I think
I get that.
The longer I am in my business and I sit with it and I evolve as a business owner, I think the more that I'm going to be able to say no to projects that aren't the right fit. I definitely think in like the early days of my business, I was just taking everything to say yes because I wanted to make money, and you were kind of like figuring out what you liked and didn't like as an interior designer and processes and things like that. But now I definitely think that there is a certain clientele that I work well with, and unless like this gentleman I'm thinking of, we have an existing relationship, I don't think certain people with yellow chairs are my people.
It's funny because like when you were describing the chairs, I was thinking like there's an element of there's a challenge to that. Okay, how do I take this square peg and put it into this round hole? And let me figure that out. But like I immediately thought of, and it's probably not the space that it ended up being, but I immediately thought of like dark wood plank flooring with these chairs sitting like these like almost like a dark navy blue curtains. Like you almost want to offset it with so much like mahogany to kind of like make it dark so that these chairs are just kind of like their own beacons because they were that important to put in there. Like I don't. It's probably not how it worked out. It probably wouldn't even like look right. But I immediately had an image of like how this room could like work out. But it's like
using gray and turquoise and yellow.
Yeah.
With a light wood, and listen, he was happy, and that's what mattered the most.
There you go. It's not a portfolio. Some things aren't portfolio pieces, you know.
That's okay. I think too, like as a business owner, I'm still growing, right? And I'm sure you guys too, as independents, are kind of like, this is working for me, this isn't working for me. How do I pivot? And that was one of those moments in which I knew I had to pivot and open up my, a different part of me that maybe felt uncomfortable as a business owner, but understanding that this is how you grow in your field, because it's a challenge. Like,
yeah,
I don't always want my projects to be easy and plug and play, because then there's nothing to that in 5 or 10 years that I can take away from and reflect back on and say, that was a growing moment.
Yeah. So talk to us, because you've just mentioned there, like, as you've grown. So talk to us, you also said you did a master's, right? So
should I give you like the full spiel? Because
yes, that's what I was going to ask for.
Okay. So I was applying to college, just coming out of the recession here in the United States, and both my parents loved the idea of me going to design school. I always wanted to be an interior designer, but because of the recession, they wanted me to have a degree that I could fall back on that wasn't dependent on the economy. So I kind of was like, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? And I loved sports journalism. Big sports fan. John knows this. Love sports. And when I was applying to schools, I only applied to schools that had great journalism programs. So that's how I ended up at Marquette University in Wisconsin. And from there, I ended up kind of being like, no, I don't want to do this, but I was still under the communications umbrella. I ended up getting my undergrad degree in corporate communications. From there, my now husband and I moved to Philadelphia, and he went to law school, and I was looking for a job, and I got a job as the office manager and like social media person of a small boutique interior design firm. And within, honestly, 90 days, I knew that A, I could run and operate an interior design firm, and B, I needed to get myself some education to figure out how this works. And so I started applying to schools. I learned that Drexel had a wonderful graduate program for people specifically kind of finding a second wind of what they wanted to do and didn't necessarily have an art background. So I did a 3-year program there, learned so much, and then I went into commercial interior design. And I always knew following school that I was going to do residential at some point. Commercial, A, you make more money immediately, and B, a lot of times though that's a good place to start when you're coming out of school, because you learn so much about the industry. You start working with reps, you have somebody above you, you're not typically running the business, you know, like there's different layers to it that make it easier. But yeah, and then I'm trying to think. So it's actually 2 years ago tomorrow I started my business.
Oh wow. So you set it up, and then how did you go about getting your first client? I always love hearing this, because in the creative industries it's notoriously hard to kind of establish yourself. So I'm always excited to hear people's journey and how they went about doing that.
So what I did is, we were living in Ohio at the time for my husband's job, and we were still very much in COVID, and a lot of what I was doing was virtual. And this is a time in which people were still using their living rooms as their office, and as so many rooms were multifunctional because we couldn't always leave, and sometimes people didn't want to, you know what I mean? So like it just had to be this multifaceted room. And I had a lot of virtual clients all over the United States, California, like literally everywhere. And it was great. But for me, going from commercial design, in which I saw a project evolve, and I was touching things and visiting sites, and it was very hands-on, to virtual, in which like I sent off the project and I didn't know if it happened or not, and I never saw an image of it finished. It was a difference for me in terms of clientele. And so once we moved back to Philadelphia, having friends and family, it's totally changed getting clients. I would say word of mouth is probably the largest way that I get clients. And then I would also say, yeah, word of mouth, and then maybe social media. But social media, it's a lot of just like, hey, what do you think of this? And then like they'll come back to me 8 months later and be like, actually, I wanted to hire you. And it kind of is that way.
Yeah. I can see social media being a lot of like DIY, like they're looking for DIY inspiration, and not like actually like, oh, let me hire this person to just do it for me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of that. I also think, given that my business, I'm really trying not to position myself as a high-end interior designer. I truly believe that interior design should be easy and accessible for everybody. And that's my mission with 1028 Home. I really wanted people to be proud of their living spaces and their bedrooms and things, regardless of your income. I think that you should be proud of it. And so when people do DM me and they're asking these questions, I don't necessarily knock it, because I feel that energy and like that kind of motivates me to keep having things be cost friendly and, you know, for everyone. But I also think from a business standpoint, I have to pay the bills. So it's kind of this like weird, I'm helping everybody, but I also know that there's a clientele out there that I have to work with to support 1028.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump back to your sports journalism background. Have you done any like finished basement sports teams? I don't want to like traditional term would be man cave, but yeah, I don't believe that only men are sports fans. Like, have you done anything like that where you got to like really dive in and say, okay, we're going to really do fandom here?
Not necessarily super fandom. I did do a basement, and the entire thing was navy. I've actually never posed the question if the reason it was navy is because my girlfriend, her husband is a diehard Penn State fan.
Okay.
And when I say the entire thing is navy, I'm talking all four walls and the ceiling.
Wow.
Like, it is true navy. It's absolutely gorgeous. They did a fantastic job with it. But I never posed the question, is it because he loves Penn State? But there isn't, I don't believe, any sports memorabilia. So we haven't gotten to like true fandom where we're displaying jerseys and have things and stuff. But I think in time, like a project like that will come. I know I'm going to geek out over a project like that because it's going to be my two worlds colliding.
So quick fun fact about the Penn State colors. The original Penn State colors were black and pink. And like the dye was not that, it was inexpensive back then. So under the sun, eventually the pink faded to white and the black faded to navy blue. And that's kind of where the colors ended up. But the original colors for Penn State were black and pink.
Oh my goodness, I had no idea.
Yep.
A little fun fact. But yeah, no, I am looking forward to that project whenever it comes because it's going to be so much fun. As long as it's not like the Yankees or the Giants or the Cowboys.
Then you know it's not a right fit, right?
Yeah, they need to hire a different interior designer.
Don't kill me for saying this. Are they football teams?
Those are baseball.
Baseball teams. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know not.
Where are you, by the way, in England? And do you have a football team? Now that we're speaking to a true.
So I'm in Lincoln, which is kind of in the middle of the country.
Okay.
Well, to the east, but smack bang in the middle. And we have a football, but like soccer, not football. As in, we call it football, but you'd call it soccer.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to be English when I said football.
Okay. And yeah, we have a Lincoln City football team, but we have like Premier Leagues. They're not.
Yeah, which tier? Because I know the pyramids for you guys. Like, which tier are you guys in?
Oh, I've got no idea.
No.
I literally don't follow football at all. I'm like,
okay, that's totally fine. That's fine.
Sorry.
By the way, another little silly fun fact: the word soccer is actually an English term. It came from England. It's short for association football. So they shortened association to soccer. But then sometime like in like the 70s or the like whatever it was, England decided we're not going to call it soccer anymore. We're going to call it football. And then they started to yell at everybody for not calling it the right name. They're like, you invented the name. Like,
I didn't know that, to be fair. I didn't know it came
You
from
need to go on Jeopardy. There are so many fun facts you have.
We'll be like, John, tell us a fun fact for today.
Yeah, right. One of the blessings of ADHD is that I go down these rabbit holes of like, I need to know the answer to this.
Oh, that's okay. That's totally fine. I wanted to talk about how you guys, like, what is your process as like entrepreneurs and solo practitioners look like versus other people? So like when you go out and get business and do you have to turn down clients as well if they don't fit for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like Stephanie answered that earlier.
Yeah, I'm still like I'm still taking on more business than probably that I shouldn't because I'm still in that growth period where my niche isn't fully defined. So I'm still taking on like, yeah, there's definitely photos that when I go to edit them, I'm definitely not inspired by them. It doesn't do any. For me, I really want to tap into, I want people with a story, and then I want to turn that story into an illustration. And in the case of this, it's a photograph. So when there isn't really a story there, then for me to kind of like conjure one up can feel a little more taxing than the normal thing. But like if somebody has a passion, like even if I'm doing like some corporate photography, branding photography, if they're passionate about their business and they have a story that they want to tell, I'm in. If they're like, oh, well, you know, I just do this and like, you know, I just need like this. And then I'm like, okay, well then like you're mailing in your story. I'm going to mail in the photos. Not that I intentionally do it, but like, it just, I'm not like super into it. It's just, it's a headshot. It doesn't, you know, they're not really inspired by it.
Yeah.
But I'm still in that early stage process where I'm taking on probably a couple of those jobs that, yeah, ideally I'd be able to turn down, but it's just, that's not the way the economics work right now.
No, but I also think that's such a good place to be because you grow so much and you figure out what you want, right? Like I know that taking on clients like yellow chairs, right? That project made me realize maybe this isn't my market. This is what I don't want to do. This is what I don't. And I feel like saying yes is where you learn. And that's how it has been for me as a creative.
Mm-hmm.
And like figuring out that pinpoint of like, this is my ideal client, because I think there's a difference between, for me specifically, an ideal client and an ideal project, right? Like the client is the person who kind of pays me and like works with me and like is able to make decisions and say yes or no. The ideal project goes back to the fandom basement or a kitchen that I'm really excited about that I would want in my home. So I'm still figuring out like the two and like being able to say yes or no to things. And I feel like that's how I'm growing as a designer.
And one thing I was gonna, when you were talking about it, like the separating the person, like, so Jasmine and I met at a networking event, right? We both do networking to go meet other people. And you know, when you're at those events, you can bounce from conversation to conversation. You're like, I need to get out of this conversation and I need to like move on. And then there's other people you just gel with. And like, those are the people I want to work with. Like, if I could have a fluid conversation with somebody, like that's that's where you get the juices flowing. You're like, I want to work with this person. And then there's other people like, oh, you know, I do this and it's okay. And it's like, yeah, I'm like, all right, I'm out. Like, I just need to eject from this conversation as quickly as possible. And I'm a chatty person. Like, yeah, I could talk to anybody for an hour, you know, but you can get a vibe when you're talking to somebody like, we're just like, I'm not going to pursue this any further, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean. Sorry, Steph, go.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say that's what I mean by like finding that ideal client versus project, because sometimes the person isn't my ideal client, but the project is, or vice versa. And so I'm trying to still align those two things, which I think is going to take years as a business owner.
But it's a process, isn't it? I only actually started photography last March 22. And then I only opened the business in like January. I started taking on clients in the October, but I was charging nothing or very, very little. And then I opened it fully. But I get quite often, and I'm not sure why, but I get quite often people asking for weddings, and I'm like, I do photos where a woman is flying in the air. Like, I don't really understand why you've come to me, but no, I don't do weddings. But I know that's not for me, because that's high turnover of photos and it's very traditional, and I'm not traditional in.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Like, if somebody's coming to you for a wedding, like, I wonder how, like, okay, you're going to get a handful of images from this wedding. They're going to be in your style, and that might be what they're looking for. That I know a wedding photographer, when she and I both kind of went full time around the same time, and she was like, just at that time, like, just taking any wedding. She's like, honestly, the weddings that I want to do bride and groom have like full sleeve tattoos. Like, she's like, I want to do gritty weddings. And she's like, and I want people who have that type of aesthetic. And like, that's the market I'm going for. Like I wonder if there are weddings where they were like, no, we want to do like, we're both into the macabre and we want to do a surreal wedding photo. And you're like, okay, well then that's what you hire me for. But you're not there for the day. You're there to do the handful of wedding photos, and then that's the end of that. Like, I wonder if there's like a niche for that.
I guess maybe it's I don't like the idea of being like there for like 8, 9, 10 hours and then having all the pressure to deliver like 2,000 photos. And then you've missed someone off. I'm like, oh God. And I said mine are very stylized, so yeah, I don't know, it just makes me go.
I did one event once, and it was for an architecture firm. It was a girl I went to school with who was organizing the event, and she asked if I could do the event, if I could, and I'm like, yeah, sure, because they had some issues with the previous photographer. It was like a 3 hour thing, but after like a half hour, I took photo. Everybody has a photo. Like, do I need to still be here? Like, I'm efficient. Like now
Yeah.
I'm just lingering around. And here's the thing I know about myself when it comes to like wedding photography or event photography. Like I have entirely too much main character syndrome to float around as a fly on the wall. Like it's just not me. Like I'm not going to do that. Like I'm going to be in the conversation at some point. So I was
John's
like,
gonna end up on the dance floor with a
Yeah.
beer. That's why he doesn't want to be a wedding photographer.
no, that's basically how it comes down to. Like, yeah,
Yeah, so I do turn people down like that. But I am open to other things. Like I've recently done a couple, which isn't normally a me thing, but they wanted like a Pam and Tommy photo shoot from the 90s, and I was like, oh, that's something a bit
Fun.
different. I'll have a go at that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm open to stuff, but yeah, more traditional like newborn or like family or like wedding. I'm like, no, it's not for me.
yeah. I just talked to her. She's a birth counselor. Is like at a networking event, and she was like, "Oh, do you do newborn photography?" I'm like, I come in about 6 months later. Like for the first 6 months, they don't really have much. They're just like they're posed and like that style is not me. But once they have a personality and the connection to mom and dad starts to come through, that's when I come in because then that to me is the story. But the
Yeah.
story is yeah for the first 6 months, it's not that's not me. Um, yeah, it's just so I do kick those. Anybody who's calling me like I just had a baby, I'm like call me in 6 months. Yeah, because
Yeah, I got it.
One thing I
Um,
will say is, sorry, Steph, do you want to go?
no, go ahead.
I feel like John, you and I really connected over connecting to people. And like that's what drives us with our business is that form of connection and creating something special. And
yeah,
I think that's what I love about interior design is knowing that I'm making somebody's space better and trying to bring out their personality to be reflected in their home. And I know you and I kind of spoke at length at that over lunch that one day, like connecting to people and like talking to them and figuring out how they operate and their brain and things like that. That's just, I love it so much. I
Exciting.
love it.
Yeah,
yeah.
I love it. I think that's why this actually ended up happening because we like, I love like talking to bouncing off of the creatives and stuff. So yeah, I love talking to people as well. So it's good. Just going back to you said about that Old Navy room, and you said about breaking kind of you're not afraid to kind of push boundaries a little bit. That's quite pushing the boundary, isn't it? Having it all navy because people often say, "Oh, don't put dark colours in dark spaces, especially not on the ceiling." So, how do you know when it's like the right time to kind of break the rule, if you can call it a rule? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think I'm in full transparency. The wife came to me, my girlfriend came to me, and she was like, "What are you thinking? Like, I want to kind of push the limits here." That is the first sign that somebody kind of I would say I'm aligned with them is they're willing to like push the boundaries of the design rules that exist. I love just juxtaposition and like making spaces have a feeling. And I think that's what we did with her basement.
Yeah.
Um, she led the charge on that one. And I was kind of that, do it 100%. I fully support you. And then she was like, oh, okay, then I'll do it. You know, um, when it comes to pushing the boundaries and like, do you do it? Do you not? It literally, in my opinion, comes down to the client. I'm always willing to push the boundaries with design, but sometimes I play it safe because that's how the client is and they play it
Mhm.
safe. Last week here in the States, it was I don't know if it's international, like Black Friday sales with Cyber Monday and
Yeah, we have it too.
okay. And it was a really busy time for me because a lot of people wanted to get furniture for their home. And I put together numerous presentations for clients and I pulled some wooden stools for a breakfast nook. And this lady has little kids, and I'm like, they're just easy and you can just wipe them off. And I was thinking practicality, like woods. And she comes to me and she's like, so I'm thinking a leather woven chair for the breakfast nook with the kids. And I'm like,
Wow.
I really I didn't get this one right at all, but let's push the boundaries, you know, like I'm here because I love it and it's beautiful. So I think it really just depends on the person and whether or not they're willing to push the boundaries, and then I'm full steam ahead.
How
Oh,
much does the like the architecture of the space like help you guide that? So I think about like you know, here in Philly, we have a mix of like, you know, revolutionary style. You know, you have your federal style buildings, and you have old for us now, not like UK old, but like old for the US, old architecture, and then you have like modern architecture in a mix. But you have people moving from one to one. Like, do you see people moving into older homes and saying, "I want a modern twist on this"? Like, I think about this in terms of like architecture, like when you put like you have an old school and you're going to extend it. Part of it is trying to figure out how to build that vocabulary so that the extension feels a part of the old building, but you're not replicating the old building styles. You have to come up with something new. Like, how does that come into play with something where you have such a diverse set of styles here?
Yeah, so I think architecture plays 100% of a role. Like I fully take it into context. Sometimes clients want to lean into their home and they maybe don't necessarily have a super traditional style, but they buy in Old City or Society Hill, and there's beautiful moldings and wood floors
Mm-hmm.
that they want to preserve, and then they kind of lean into it, and they, you know, want the sofa that has a roll arm instead of the modern arms. Um, I don't know. I think also you can't take it too far in terms of like you have a beautiful row home in the city with all of these, you know, historic attributes, and then put acrylic chairs in there, because it's just not gonna, it really really will feel super out of place, and like the
Yeah.
juxtaposition is not even juxtaposition, it just goes into weird,
Yeah.
you know. So I like walking that fine line, I think is really important. I also think I love, part of the reason that we were drawn to Philadelphia is the character, and so I do like to lean into it, but I think that there's moments that you can still be in 2023 with just like historic preservation. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have it, you love it, you take care of it, but you also, I don't know, maybe you sand down the floors and you stain them a different color, or like there's ways to do it in which you're not in 1855. I don't know.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, if someone was to give you like, because you spoke briefly about having like, oh, that's like my dream project. If someone was to say to you, right, what is your dream space, your dream project? You can go anything, you can go crazy, you can break all the rules. What would that look like?
Um, this might sound silly, but I really do think my ideal project is in which like the client and the project align. That's one. I think a client that knows what they want over seeing it. A lot of times people say, well, I know what I want, I just have to see it first.
Mm.
No, then you don't know what you want, you know. So a decisive client who actually knows what they want, I think, is paramount for me with
Yeah.
my little dream fantasy world here. um and then I think it probably would be like a historic space
Oh,
that they
yeah.
want to modernize.
Yeah.
And I've dipped my toe into a couple of those projects in terms of like doing a room or a couple rooms in a home. I'm in the process right now of like beginning a full renovation in Society Hill, which will be fun because then I'm going to do hopefully what we're talking about. Um, but I also think it would be so fun to do like a space in which there was like no limits in terms of color.
Mm.
Like they wanted the pop of red. And when I say pop, I mean like a pillow, you know, but like it's not super crazy. I also think it would be super fun to do a project in which the person was like full on the other side of modern and loved every aspect of modern. And it wasn't West Elm modern. It was like Scandinavian cabinets that are like flat, like that type
Yeah.
of modern. Um,
And it's funny, those, I mean, those, like, when you look at some of the, like, the condo towers that are going up now, like, those spaces are ripe for them because they're floor to ceiling windows. They're like meant for sparse and modern and light, and like, yeah, they don't have the structures themselves don't have the visual heft to them. So everything else would have to feel light.
Yeah, and this goes to the question, like, kind of hand in hand with what you just asked. Like, you can't do super modern in an old neighborhood in Philadelphia. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, architecture really does dictate 100% of the design, at least from my perspective. I think you have to work with the bones of the home. Otherwise, a certain aspect of it is just not going to feel fluid.
Yeah. In
That's
the UK, we actually have I don't know if you guys have it as well. Like if there's a style of like building, I know you do interiors rather than the architecture, but because we were touched on it. If there's a style on the street of a certain type of building, you then can't bring in like a modern building. Like you're not allowed. You've got to keep it in style with the rest of the buildings on
Oh,
that street.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess you
So
guys don't have that.
certain neighborhoods, it depends. It's hit or miss. So it's not as stringent as that, but there are certain neighborhoods in which you have to do that, and there are certain blocks where you have to do that. So the block could be historical, but then there's variances. Like, for instance, there is a historical part of the city. It's called Jewelers Row. Like, there was a lot of neighborhood fighting about it. Well, they tore down one of the buildings, and all the buildings are about this high, and they are building a condo tower at the end of it, and they're trying to figure out a design that works for the ground level, but like they're going vertical.
Wow.
So it really, that took years of fighting between the neighborhood and the developer, and like this and that, and like, can we do this, can we not? So sometimes there's a fight, sometimes there's not a fight, and sometimes it's not even up for debate. So you couldn't necessarily do that and stuff. This is not going to mean anything to you, but like, Jasmine, can you imagine if like somebody wanted to like put up a modern building on Delancey Street in Society Hill? Like, Delancey Street in Society Hill is like one of my favorite streets. It has old bollards, like, and still stones out on the it's mostly brick sidewalk with these, and there's some of them still have the stones out front, which was the step where you would come off your horse. Like,
yeah.
they still have those things there. Like, that's part, and the street is cobblestone. So you have these brick federal style houses. So it's the brick with the ornate transom windows above the door. And to put something modern in there would be just like, it would be gross. And so it
Crazy.
would never be allowed.
Yeah.
But there are certain spaces where I live on a street where it's mostly brick row homes, but over the years, like, I'm so far down in the south, like there was like nobody watching for years. So like there's a bunch of like random different building types down here, and they just kind of went with it. They're all row homes, they're all connected to each other, but some have vinyl front, some have stucco front, some have brick front. It's totally random.
If you like that old Delaney Street, John, you need to come to Lincoln in England. Like it'll blow your flicking mind. Like there's like we've got the modern part of the city as well, which is also really nice. But like the old parts, like I'm gonna send you some photos after this.
Yeah.
It'll blow your mind. It's all like that, like all of
I
it.
love it.
And we've even got like so my house I live on is called Tudor Road, and all the houses like Tudor style. But at the top of we have something called Steep Hill, which is like, as it sounds, insanely steep, and most people have to stop halfway because it's so steep. But and it leads up to the cathedral, but that's all cobblestones. But like even some of the old shops, like the buildings like bowed because it's still in perfect use, but it's because
Yeah.
it's so old. But yeah, you would love it.
No,
I don't,
whenever I go to Europe, it's like a different type of old. Like, it's just,
yeah,
and I have buddies of mine who are architects out in California. The first time they ever came to Philadelphia, I took them to some of the older sites here, and they were blown away because in California, they can't imagine cobblestone streets. Like, that's inefficient to drive on. I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
but we were never going to take these up. Like, we preserve that. And that's our version of old. But like, over what you guys have, that's an everyday thing. Like, it's almost like
yeah.
you don't even notice you have it.
Oh, that's my favorite part of the city, but and it's very pretty, especially at Christmas time. I'm going to take photos and show you, but yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
There's also, and this is what made me think of you, Jasmine. There's this building that I always say, if I won the lottery, I would buy this building and turn it into like a massive load of like photography studios, and it's very old. I couldn't even name what century it's from, but it has all like arced ceilings, like when you see,
Vaulted.
yeah, and like has like the stained glass and stuff like that, and it's just
Oh,
really, it's really grand building, and it's been set like it's been a restaurant, it's been I think it was a hotel at one point, it was a nightclub at one point, but it's still got all these old structures, and I was like, oh my god, this would, when you were like, oh, go to town with it, I'm like, both of you, if I win the lottery, we're doing this.
Love
Get
it.
you over, you're gonna design it.
Anything with an archway, I'm in. I
yeah.
love
Yeah,
art. There's one thing that makes me like my true forever favorite part of interior design is an archway.
yeah,
I just think they're so pretty and you can see like the evolution of them and how they're coming back in the style. I just love them so much.
So
all the doors are arched as well. The doors and the windows, and then the ceilings arched as well. It's just so nice. And I'm like, if I had a spare 2.5 million, that
Flying
would be
around.
mine. Yeah.
So real quick question before we wrap up, because what you just mentioned made me think. So because you have a degree in interior design, like you have an understanding of structure. Do you ever do any fundamental structural changes on the interior, or are you trying to maintain that structure? So, like for instance, are you taking a square arch and saying we're going to round this because it's going to give you a much more intimate cove rather than just the straight beam across the top. Like, do you ever start to play with people's structure at all?
Yes. Even in renovations, yes. I think a lot of times people, unless there's a very hefty budget, things like that typically get cut from the project.
Yeah.
Because it's not a make or break in terms of the design. It's
Yeah.
a nice to have. But I do think like they are proposed, but typically because of a wood beam that's structural and then the engineer's cost and everything, other things,
Yeah.
that part just kind of gets cut out because they don't have an extra $3,000 laying around. But I think things like that transform a space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you go from like the square typical thresholds to a rounded edge one, or even like the front door, like how you mentioned, Stephanie. Like, I don't know, it changes the feel
Yeah,
and
yeah,
makes it more cozy and warm and invite, like there's
Mm-hmm.
just a different element. And I think that's also why like shapes, people don't understand how much like linear shapes read cold. When
yeah,
you have
Yeah.
a square coffee table that's a true like square, not a rounded edge square, like
Mm-hmm.
square, it makes the entire room feel a different way.
yeah,
And it doesn't become cozy and like let's play a game or do a puzzle. It's very much like we're gonna sit here and be proper and have some tea, you know?
yeah, yeah. I completely agree. And I actually, in my own home, I prefer like in my own home, in my design, in my even my handwriting is
I
like
was gonna say,
square.
like, even your photography, like, you don't like straight anything. It's everything. Everything is squiggly and floating around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and I also
Those
think like
solid.
you guys know this as creatives, but like when your eye moves, like that's
Mm-hmm.
when things become interesting,
Yeah,
right? Like you want to look around and kind of be like, oh wow, look at the height difference. Oh look, a movement here. And
Yeah.
it doesn't
right,
necessarily
right,
need to
right.
be line, because that's just not fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just did an intro to photography class like at a community center a couple nights ago, and I was talking about composition. And like I
Mhm.
had a portrait where the person was facing one side, and it's like depending on where you put that person in the photo, like you're gonna follow their eye. Now, if they're looking at the short end of the photo, now you got to wrap yourself around. That feels there's a little bit of tension there, and that could be intentional. But usually you want to have them looking at the long edge because you want to follow their eye to see the whole photo. But you're orchestrating that purposely and making those lines as because we follow it, even if we don't know we're doing it, we're following a pattern. We're just creatures that way.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think that's what makes us like as creatives, like there's a layer to it that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. And I think what separates like the good creatives from the greats is understanding like more about humans and how we operate and what we find beautiful and comfortable, and all these other different adjectives you want to insert into that, because once we do that, that's how we become really great at our profession. So John, you saying like following the eye and needing to wrap it around, like doing that in a photograph, I would have no idea where to start.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like you tell me to do that designing a bookshelf or arranging a living room with a sofa and a plant and a table, you know what I mean? Like that's just so much easier for me. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, it's I have actually said that to people because I think that a designer or any creatives like that, like their best trait is to be able to connect with another person because it doesn't work otherwise. Whether you're making a space or a photograph or a piece of music or a movie, if it doesn't connect with another human being, then it didn't do its job. Nobody, if it, I'd rather it be vilified than ignored, and because it has to feel something. And I think that, and especially in the world of design. So I used to say this when I was in architecture school. I used to say like, art is meant to be interpreted, design is meant to be understood, and that means like and another person needs to come into that space and understand what that room is supposed to be and supposed to do. Where art, you could do something and like I may not know what the artist's intent was, but I'm going to interpret it my own way. But if it's your house, I need to know like where the kitchen is. Like I can't like, it's like I can't be like in a hidden doorway. Like there's got to be a vibe that an average person could like at least get it. And if you don't understand the human experience, I don't think that you can be a good designer.
I think that's why I fell in love with interior design. If I'm
Yeah.
being honest with you, is like the connection and the psychological component and knowing that I can make a difference in people's lives and making them be happy with their space and feel comfortable and safe.
Nice feeling.
Yes.
Well, that's a good note to wrap it up. So, Jasmine, where can everyone find you and bombard your inbox with new work?
So the website is 1028.com, 1028home.com, excuse me. So that's 1028 HOME.com. And then it's the same handle on Instagram.
What was the origin of your name?
So this is my husband's last name, and he believes that it is Polish.
Oh, no, not your last name. Your company name.
Oh, okay, sorry. So 1028 is my parents' anniversary. And I always believe, like for me, home was surrounded by my parents. And like that was the foundation of love and everything that my sister and I ever knew. So
that's really awesome. I'm glad that you should tell that story more because I'm really glad that I know that story now.
Oh, well, good. Thank you.
That's really sweet. Ah, how cute.
Yeah, no, my parents my mom was the one who got me in interior design. I was the little kid. I know we have to wrap up here. Quick story. The little kid that was like 9 and 10 years old, begging my mom to like be able to watch room by room or trading spaces. And like, I wanted one more show, mom, please. Cause I loved HGTV and like the TLC shows. And I've always known I was going to be an interior designer.
I love that. Adorable.
Well,
thank you so much for having me.
Jasmine, thanks for dropping by. This was a lot of fun.
Of course. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you.